Okay, I don't know why my movie reviewer voice just came out for you guys, but apparently we're going into a theatrical day of entering into the realm of sacred storytelling. And I'm going to ask all of you who have your videos on. I love it when you have your videos on. I'm also going to ask if you have to move to please turn your videos off. And I'm going to give you your first little awesomeness around how humans evolved. And one of the ways that we evolved was through our peripheral vision. We saw the dinosaurs running at us, and our fight or flight minds went off, and we entered into the realm of survival, and then we stopped all capacity for critical thinking and paying attention and focus because we went into full survival mode. And so that still happens to us every time we see moving images. That means that every time we watch television, it actually triggers that the moving images actually trigger our fight or flight sensibilities. It's kind of wild. They've done research on this. It actually affects the way that we take in information and how we process information. Another bizarre point of information. So thank you guys. I love seeing you because storytelling is actually a collaborative process. The way that your bodies are, the way that you respond to this, it's a conversation that we are all in together. And it's just like when everybody's moving around, it gets a little hard. Okay. So what are we going to be doing today? We're going to go over, a lot of content information, and a lot of it's going to be a basic introduction into this realm of sacred storytelling, and a little bit with a mystic perspective. So it's not going to be the 6 bullet points for how to sell something with a story. I'm not going to help you become an entrepreneur and convince people to invest in lots and lots of money into your world, but I will bring you to the threshold of one of the most ancient sacred tools that this planet has given humans. And I really believe storytelling at its core gives us everything that we require to come into the greatest expression of our humanness. And so I'll be talking a little bit about what that all looks and feels like. At the end, I will introduce you to the School for Sacred Storytelling, and that goes like that. So let's start with a quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to hate. They tell us to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories saddle us and they ride us and they whip us onward. And they tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit. And I really love to begin with that quote because it gets to the heart of the journey of what it is to be a storyteller and all the different thresholds of initiation that we go through. And that, as we enter into this realm of being storytellers, first we've got to be able to see a story. We have to be able to name it. We have to be able to consciously choose which ones we're going to carry and give life to through the gift of our voice, through our breath. And then, what is it to become a storyteller? I would add, what is it to be a conscious creator? And so that's a great thing to wonder about. And if there's anything that I've understood in my world of being in relationship to stories, is that stories are often more powerful than storytellers. And to truly be a storyteller, you gotta have some. I would say it's the warrior path, not a soldier's path, but a warrior's path, to truly stand at the threshold of being a sacred storyteller. We're going to talk about what's the difference between telling a story and a sacred story. I'm going to read you one more quote just because I love it. It's one of my favorites. My cousin Helen, who is in her 90s now, was in the Warsaw Ghetto during the World War II. She and a bunch of the girls in the ghetto had to do sewing each day. And if you were found with a book, it was an automatic death penalty. She had gotten hold of a copy of Gone with the Wind, and she would take 3 or 4 hours out of her sleeping time each night to read. And then during the hour or so, when they were sewing the next day, she would tell them all the story. These girls were risking certain death for a story. And when she told me that story herself, it actually made what I do feel more important. Because giving people stories is not a luxury. It's actually one of the things that you live and die for. That's by Neil Gaiman. So, I'll tell you a little bit about yourself. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, I'm just going to invite you to tap into the part of your being and to come into relationship with this vessel of life that you are in with your soul. And so just noticing your body, noticing, are you leaning forward or leaning back? Are you slumped over to the side? And don't change it. That's not, we're not in the changing, we're not in the business of changing. I'm just going to invite you to just become aware of it, aware, what does it really feel like to be meeting the world in this posture? Maybe it feels really good. You've worked really hard for this stature. Or maybe you're noticing that you're leaning forward and that you're overextending in your life and you're overproducing, you're over delivering, you're overcompensating. Or maybe you're leaning back and you're kind of, standing off from life and you're not fully engaging and you're on the sidelines. Wherever you are, I'm going to invite you to come into the center. Notice where you are on your sit bones. I'm going to invite you to imagine that there's a thread at the tip of your head and that just gently pulls you up and your spine just goes straight up and all of your organs are going, whee, oh my God, there's all this space for us now. Wow. And then inviting your shoulders just to roll back. And your heart can go, whoa, I'm really open and vulnerable to the world. Maybe that feels really good to some of you. Maybe some of you, it's like, wow, it's a little bit intense. Hold the phone. Just noticing. And I invite you into this noticing of your body because this is the vessel. This is the tool that we use for storytelling. So let's come into this relationship with this tool. I'm going to invite you to imagine this in this heart, and I'm going to invite you to really think about, wonder about, why are you here today? What calls you here? What calls you to the threshold of sacred storytelling? Is it because there's stories that are inside of you that are banging around, just trying to get out? Is it because the muse keeps tapping on your shoulder and just being like, come on, carry me through, carry the story through the dimension, midwife me? You're the birther of new stories. Is there something, are you one of those rare people among us that is committed to carrying the old stories forward? You're an archaeologist of types, and you want to go back and study those old stories so that they can keep them alive. Yeah. Just coming to who are you as a storyteller. I'm going to invite you to allow your heart to drop into that space of what calls you fully here today. And is there something that you need to hear on your own journey? Is there something that you really need for your journey? And could it somehow, through our collective wondering today about stories and storytelling, could it emerge in our space today? So I want to call on some of the ancient wisdom about the role of story. But first, what I'll do is, the reason why I have us start this way is because this is the vessel. This is the tool that story comes through. And so what a beautiful thing to come into relationship with it and to come into connection with it. You guys all turned off your video almost. I didn't mean to tell you all to turn off your video. It's so nice to see you. So let's come into this. Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or set it into motion. Isn't that amazing? I often think about that, in terms of, there's still this embodied practice of hula, where the prayer is so embodied that it comes through motion, through movement, through the chant. Sicilian believes that words poke holes in the universe. I always think about that when I'm a little bit, when the temperature starts to rise, that whatever is said can't ever be taken back. And there's no knowing if the other person is going to hear it as you intended it. There's some wisdom there. Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present so that the future can exist. The Maori say that words don't describe a thing, they are the thing. In Japan, there's a word called kotodama, and it means word spirit. And it refers to the original divine spirit of a word before it enters the word of thought waves. The significance of Kotodama is that words are alive and they have the power to create. Abracadabra is one of the most ancient words on our planet. I create as I speak. There's this great poem written by Edward Field, and it goes like this. It's called Magic Words. In the very earliest time when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. And sometimes they were people and sometimes animals, and there was no difference. And all spoke the same language. That was the time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody could explain this. That's just the way it was. So Edward Field translated that from the Inuit. So every ancient religion agrees on something, that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I always think about that. I'm going to say it again because it's kind of mind-blowing to me, that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. And to me, this gives us a little bit of a hint into our existence as humans. Like, you know, I love that so many people are saying, like, why am I here? You have to, yeah, I always believe the question is here, and so is the answer. So, you know, it's like this question that is living among us, like, why are we here? You know, it's like, but here we have this ancient wisdom teaching that talks about our capacity as creators, and that we have this really amazing ability to bring something from the unseen realms, from the realm of dreams and imagination and fantasy, and then give them the electrical pulse that comes through the battery of our life, through our heartbeat, and give it resonance. And then all of a sudden we can speak it. And through our speaking, we can convince others to use their bodies to change form and matter into what we've spoken. It's kind of amazing. You know, and if you're not doing that, perhaps you are being used in someone else's dream, based on what they want and what they're calling forth and what they've visioned into being. So our words are very, very powerful. And as humans, we're very, very powerful. And I would say that a lot of this life that we're currently in right now is a moment of getting to come back into right relationship with that power. And it's a great responsibility. So a little bit of my journey that I'll just share in terms of what brought me to you is, you know, I would say I grew up at a farm in Vermont. You know, I grew up on the land. I wandered around in creeks. I found bones in the springtime. I really fell in love with earth. And I was by myself as a only child for the first 8 years of my life. And so when you're an only kid living in rural places, you know, by the way, you know, people say, like, it's not like it is now. There's a lot of, like, just go outside and play and see you at dinner time, you know. So it's like I ended up finding a lot of connection and companionship in the nature. And I didn't realize how meaningful that would be until later in life. I learned that I learned the business of storytelling fairly young. I was working in a theater professionally. My parents gave me this extraordinary gift. They noticed my talent. They put me in a lot of schools for the performing arts. I got plucked right out very young and was invited to join a professional theater company. That was been Studio Theater, Chris, if you remember those days, of Richmond, Virginia, with Randy Stradaman, an extraordinary director. And when it came time for going to college, I was like, okay, I want to go study acting at you know, the most expensive college in the world. And my parents were like, how about you not waste your time and our money studying acting in college, if that's what you want to go do, and just go find an acting school in New York, and we'll help you that way. And so I took up the challenge. I got into an acting school in New York and went straight there at age 18 and learned very young that, oh, no way, I didn't know that world. Not only was I not cut out for it in any shape or form, but I also really didn't want to spend my life speaking other people's words. But I got to be in some really big theaters. I got to spend a lot of time in that world. And I also got to witness firsthand that there was something very, I'm going to use the word magical. There was something magical that was happening. We were building this energy, this life force, and I could feel it in the room. And it's so funny. I always think of this exact moment when I was at Williamstown Theater Festival. We were working on A Midsummer Night's Dream. I could feel the palpable magic that we were creating. And I was like, what if we could do something with that energy and it doesn't just walk out the door? And that question led me on a big journey of, really coming to utilizing the arts for social change. When it came time to go to school, I was very lucky again. I ended up at a school where honestly, I followed the cool kids. I went there because they would let me study whatever I wanted to, and they were going to let me merge my love of the environment with my love of the arts to study environmental education through performance. There's a school that will let you do that. And when I got there, all the cute boys were taking these wilderness leadership classes. And I was like, well, that's where I want to be. So that's where I went. And I ended up also getting a degree in outdoor experiential education and spent a lot of those years learning wilderness leadership. And something was happening in that space. All of a sudden, everything that I had learned in theater immediately applied to working in small groups in the wilderness. And all of that group process, all of that understanding how teams work, understanding communication, how to do how to meet a common goal, they were all there. But there was something that I was also seeing was that, in my desire to be part of the healing of this planet, and that was really one of the driving things that had me. It was really like I wanted to be part of the healing. I was growing up with that story that we've got a race to save the planet. And so I wanted to play a part, and I wanted to save the planet. And so I was in this great question of how could I do that? And I realized that, man, if people can't heal themselves, there's no way that they can heal the earth. It just became so obvious that if I really want to take care of the earth, I was going to have to help people, or so I thought, help themselves. And so that led me down a track of getting a master's in social work. It was an amazing degree. I'm so grateful for it. It gave me a whole new way of looking at society and systems. It also was part of a time in my life when I experienced cancer and thyroid cancer. And it was one of the great first initiations that I went through in my life. And initiations are powerful things. Health crises are powerful things because they will tell you, they will take you to your knees. They will bring you to the edge of surrender. They will plead with you to take off your armor. They will give you every weapon and tool that you've ever used to survive now. And they'll say, what are you going to need to put down so that you can have enough space to engage something new, to come into a full state of thriving? And I was on that initiation, but of course I didn't have a clue of what was happening at the time. I didn't know. I was just scared out of my wits. But something in me came online. Some aspect of my soul came in and said, yes, I'm going to give up the archetype of victim, and I'm going to find out what's on the other side. And it was really something else. That was part of my journey. I'm not saying that that's everybody's journey when it comes to those kinds of things. But in that process, it was really clear that I actually had fallen off the path of my true genius. I had gone towards this path of safety rather than follow my passion. And my passion was always in the arts, and it was always in theater. It was always in the spoken word. And so that brought me right back. And I started an organization called the Performance Initiative, which is all about utilizing the arts for social change. We did a lot of things. Again, I had that question, how do we get that energy and point it in the direction so that it does something if we're going to build all this energy? That led me to San Francisco. I got to work with Al Gore's television network. I worked with a lot of different campaigns, like documentary social impact campaigns. I got to see how much money we spend on those campaigns to create social change and where does real change happen, and then I also got to be at the heart of the climate movement in terms of what do we say? How do we use our words to get people to take action? And I got to be in the center of that story. So I'll come back to Chris's question about how do we tend to this ground story around 6 mass extinction. Maybe that will be the very end story at the end. So in the process of all this and coming to the heart of my own prayer of, how do I be part? And it was in my story, my question changed. It's not how do I save the planet? This planet's going to be fine. She's fine. She's got this. It's more of how can I be part of the restoration and the healing of my time? How can I be part of the reconnection of the relationship between humans and Earth? And when that question changed, it started coming to me. The answers started, the questions started being answered through story. And so what I understand story to be, I'm going to give a little spoiler alert and we're all going to talk about it in a bit, but it is an access to the unseen world. And so all these stories started coming alive in me. I started writing a lot of them and giving them. And what I came to was eventually creating a school for sacred storytelling. I say that, what's the difference between a teacher and anybody else? Everybody has the opportunity to, it's like we're all drinking from the same stream. If you go to the stream and drink, it's all available to us. Teachers are blabbermouths and they just share what they get. So a lot of what I'm going to say, you're going to be tapping into your own wisdom, your own knowing, because we are all storied beings, and we're going to say some things and you're going to be like, yeah, of course, because I'm just repeating back some basic things that you already know, and perhaps widening the perspective of how you can engage what you already know. So that's a little bit of how I came to be here. So thank you, Maya. Oh my God, that's so sweet. I went to the third school that's in the sister schools of what you spoke to. I went to Prescott College. So, yeah. So, okay. So what is it? What is a story? I'm going to ask, this is a question that I'm truly asking all of us. What is this creature that brings us together today? And you can take yourselves off mute and share your ideas out loud, or you can place them in the chat box. And there's no wrong answer. There's a what's coming alive in you today.
I was curious.
I'd say, oh, sorry, go on.
I was just curious. It sounds, at first it sounded like you were talking about stories as fiction. And I was wondering if that includes nonfiction as well, or a combination of both.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What was the question? What was the question, Anne? Exactly.
What is a story?
Oh, what is a story?
Story. And so, Sina, one of my favorite quotes, and gosh, I wish I could remember it, is who said it, but that sometimes there's more truth in fiction. So, the idea between a fictional story and a non-fictional story, it's like, we'll talk more about that in a bit, but I'm speaking to both. Yeah.
I think I would say that the story is the emotional facts.
Okay, so our stories hold emotion inside them. I'm not going to pick up the thread around facts because it's such a complicated thing. I'll talk about truth, which truth is a carpentry term, and it means it's a straight line from A to Z. And it says, it's like you use a level, and that has to do with the truth. And so that means that we can all be centered around, we can all sit in a circle and be looking at the same thing and have different truths, and all of us could be absolutely right. Tyson Yukimura talks about in Australia, they have a practice where all the different tribes will come together and they'll sit around and they'll all tell their different stories about the same thing, like the moon. And they all have different stories. They all see different things. And what's the distinction between a good story and a bad story? Well, that good stories, they can all sit next to each other and coexist. So there are some key things when we go back to sacred storytelling. I feel like sacred storytelling, when you come to the roots of the wisdom that lives in it, is like gives you some clear guidance on how to make our way through the information era. Does this story let other stories live beside it, or does it banish everything around it? Makes one curious. Okay, what else? What is a story? What is a
It's
story?
Tracy here. Sorry, I'm not on visual, but for me, it's like living, dancing words, and they're filled with meaning. Every story matters.
Wow, love
Mm.
that. You're using meaning. You're saying the word matter. You know, how we relate to matter matters. You know, right? And that there's there. You know, when you say stories, there's meaning in it. It's got a job. They're doing something oftentimes.
Mm.
And so what is your story doing? You know, how is it being in the world? Is it bringing us together? Is it creating connection? Is it creating enough space for some insight? Is it offering some wisdom? Is it causing a separation? Is it implanting the seeds of fear? Is it, you know, disrupting the peace? Well, you know, there can be great stories, very sacred stories that can disrupt the peace, but it's like, what is it? So it's like we're talking about, right? They're like, sometimes they got jobs to do. They're doing something.
Yes.
I saw Samantha talk about a journey. Stories will take us on a journey. Yes, they're going to take us somewhere. You know, you're not going to be like, you know, here's the thing when we talk about facts. I have a dear friend of mine, and when I ask him how his day was, he'll be like, well, I did this, 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 you know, and this is how his brain works, right? You know, and it's very information based, you know. And I'm a storyteller. So if you asked me how my day was, well, I was like, well, you know, I was really thinking about this, and then I had this epiphany, and then I thought, well, what about this? And then this happened, and then that happened. But if you interrupt me like in the third minute, you don't understand that stories, like when you're talking to a storyteller, we don't think in linear terms, and we don't think informationally or factually. We think about the journey. And so you might say, how would you do today? And I'm trying to tell you, I checked my email and I got this amazing email. But first I have to tell you about how I got to the place of the email to be even open to receiving it. You know, so it's like, all right, they're gonna stories and storytellers, they will take you on a journey. Maya.
I like all of that, and I think I teach kids part-time environmental ed, and they almost always, no matter what I say, they have a little story about how they relate to the horseshoe crab, or how they saw this fish there and here and here. So it's like there's something often personal, even if it's not directly about you. There's some way that you can find personal meaning or collective meaning through it that synthesizes maybe actual factual, so-called factual information, and other forms of knowing. And it gives meaning. It gives some kind of meaning. So there, I know we could get into transformation and all of that too, but that's more like the journey.
Right. So stories, they help us understand the world, you know, especially with kids and teaching, they help our memories. You know, they have done research, and I wish I could remember where this little tidbit of information came from, but they've done a lot of information research where, you know, yes, like they help us with our memory, but they also help us make meaning of the world. So that means that when we're stuck in this, but facts and information do not make meaning. You know, facts and information are a part of it, but them by themselves. So when we look at the climate story, it's one of the most complicated things. If you've been in a room of people that have all received a lot of information, all of the energy goes in the room, and you can feel it. It's palpably heavy, you know, and part of the reason is because we literally can't metabolize information. We can't do what our humanness don't do, which is make meaning out of something. And that's what stories help us do. They help us make meaning. So yes, Michael's saying a collection of puzzle pieces that one has all of. Do you want to explain that a little bit more?
That no one has all of.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that that no one has all of. It's like we're putting these puzzle pieces out there and into the collective, and we don't control the impacts that we're having. And that all of us are then sharing well, if we're interrelating with, we're all having experiences of from our own lenses and points of view, like a collective dream.
Mhm.
And some people can, but yeah, so a good story is one where everyone's perspectives are brought into the story and are allowed in our appreciated in the meaning making of the story,
Hmm.
in the interpretation of the story. So I think of it that way, and I think of the difference between, oh, that's a story. Like we have such a language around, oh, that's a story. That person's telling a story, or oh, you're in your story. There's a lot of negative meanings attached versus, oh, that's a story.
Mhm.
And that's one that really resonates
Mhm.
and generates meaning
Right.
and meaning making. That's how I would say.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And yeah, that piece of like, oh, we have associations where, well, if you're spinning that tale, what does that mean? Yeah, and stories, we're surrounded by them. Shanti saying, considering everyone's stories inevitably brings up paradox. So how does paradox factor into stories? That is a question for another day, Shanti, that we could go off on that for a good 3 hours, I think. You just opened up a door to a whole other mystery world, which I love it, But here's what I'll say about the power of storytelling is that what they've done research, and bringing different perspectives into the world. Look, when we look at the news, perhaps one of the most dangerous things that news has done is tried to present all information as equal. That's a whole other ball of wax I'm not going to get into. But when we look at the power of storytelling that is alive in us, when they've done research on what changes people's minds or creates openings for people to be open to things that they were once closed to. They did research on how people relate to sexual identity. And they did this with a group of people that had firm beliefs that anything other than heterosexual normative behavior was acceptable. And they showed them a bunch of TV shows like Will and Grace and other shows where they got to see transgender people, and they got to hear stories told from those people's perspectives. And what they did in the research was that the first time they saw one, they were like, oh, this is, they became curious. After 2 or 3 shows, they became more open to different perspectives, to ones that they were clearly closed to before. So I mentioned that, right, like stories we can have, I love it when, Starhawk talks about this, and she articulated something that I had been experiencing, where she said, I take my biggest problems to the fictional stories. Where when we're trying to figure something out, we can get out of our mind and our ego where we know the answers, and we can open it up to the story where we can see different perspectives, and all of a sudden different conversations can come into our own. So there's a little paradox throw for you, Shanti. Okay. So we're talking about what is a story. A couple other ways to look at what is a story. It's an operating system. If we understand that humans relate to themselves often in relationship to the latest technology. So it's an operating system, and it helps us understand our belief systems, our values, and what we believe is possible. That's one thing that it does. Look at the TV shows that you were watching. What roles did you think you could play? What was acceptable? What was valued? What was love supposed to look like? All those things. Programming. They call the television show programming. I love it. It's all in the language. Trust the words. Stephen Jenkins says, I trust words more than I trust stories more than I trust storytellers. The words won't let you down. Love that. Whenever I hear a word and I'm like, something feels off, I'll often go back to the etymology, and I'm like, oh, that's what that word really means. It felt off because it's been hijacked and it's being used against its true nature. Oftentimes it's such a great way to get to know what we're really saying. I'll go off on that for just a moment. Apocalypse. We've been told we're in apocalyptic times. This is horrible. This is really bad. The end of the world is here. What does apocalypse mean? It means a lifting of the veils. That's what apocalypse means. It means that you'll actually lift the veils and you can see what's behind the curtain. It's that Wizard of Oz moment, So yeah, it is the end of a chapter. It's the end times because, we're like, well, hold the phone. We can see what's really here. Do I want to live in a world of sexism and patriarchy and racism and all that stuff? When I can really see it and name it and face it, and so, oh, wow, maybe we want to turn and look at these things. Maybe we want to choose another way of living together. This is like, yeah, we're in apocalyptic times, baby. This is really exciting. So it's like, again, go back to the etymology of these words. So another way of looking at a story, it's like an operating system. It's such a grotesque expression of it, of something so magical. And I was walking through the canyons, and I live in Topanga Canyon in Southern California, and the trees were like, "That's gross, Leah. Like, don't use that word anymore." And I said, "Well, I'm just meeting them where they are." And the tree says, "Yeah, but you should tell them what a story really is." And I was like, "Well, what is it to you, trees?" We have a little communion talk, and it says, "Well, they're a library of the soul." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that feels good." That a story is a library of the soul. It's a library of our consciousness. And so I can tell a story, about me when I was 5 years old, and all the things, and blah, blah, blah. And then it can change. The more awareness I get, the more I understand about life. That story can change and it can get bigger. And then I can become more informed, and I can get some initiations that I can understand about human development. And oh my God, now my story got really big, and that is like, it's a library of the soul's existence, and it's carrying our evolutionary consciousness inside of them. So when we share our stories, we're essentially saying, stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and everyone that's come for me and everything that I've learned so far. And here you go. It's carrying our evolutionary consciousness. We can all go further as we learn more and more of the stories. We know the dangers of not sharing our stories through the Me Too movement is one of the easiest, lowest hanging fruits to point this out. It was really shocking to me as a storyteller when I started hearing all the stories and how there were so many common threads in them. They were repeat. And I was like, wow, if more people had been able to live in a world where they could share, where they felt they could share their story in real time, how many other women and men wouldn't have had those experiences of pain and suffering? So it's like, we really get that sharing our stories, sharing our experience really actually supports our collective learning. Now, that's one way of looking at a story. Here's another way of looking at a story. So, what was the word after they mentioned apocalypse? I don't know. I don't know. I keep trying. Another way of looking at a story is that we're going to kind of enter into the world of sacred story. Okay, what's a sacred story? But I'm going to talk about this anyway. It's a story. It's an energy being. There's an energy in it. So look, our bodies, it houses the soul, right? We know this. Where there's a lot of common agreement. It's a story that we're sharing, right? This body has a soul that lives inside of it, and a lot of the ancient cultures and religions agree with that. And here we are. Okay. Now, what if we started playing with that language of metaphor, and that the vehicle for energy is story? Okay. And so those different energies get to live in the vehicle and the structure and the holographic structure of a story, and get to be brought to life to live among us. So when Michael's saying, well, someone goes, said, that's just my story, well, maybe they're in the story of separation, or they're in the story of whatever, and someone can feel this energy being, but we don't really have the language for all that yet, but we can sense a story, we can sense an energy, and so these different stories can live through us, and they can be the stories of happiness and joy and connection and union and love. We can share all these stories. We can also have these energies of disconnection, fear, betrayal. We can carry those stories inside us too. So now think about these energy beings and what they do to your life force when they get stuck in your energetic system. And so I think that sometimes stories, it's like they're quick, they're fierce, and they're fast. And if there's a crack in your system, they'll come right on in. So one of the very first question, I ask people is to say, and who doesn't have cracks in their system? It's like, so it's like, we ask people, like, what are you in service to? It's so great. You can use your energetic body. What am I in service to? Well, I'm in service to love, or I'm in service to connection or communion. I'm in service to all these things. And now you can start to put on your storytelling goggles and start like looking at, and think about it just like when you're snorkeling. You know, when you're snorkeling and you're going about and you're like, you can't see anything without your goggles on, right? You're like, it's all blurry and it all looks the same. And I know there's a shark out there, and should I go up or down? But you put your goggles on, you can chill out a little bit because you can now see the show and you can pick and choose and go extra close to the coral and all the good stuff. And so same thing with these stories, you can start to spot them. So let's go into, what is a sacred story? What do we understand about that? What is a sacred story? You're quiet all of a sudden. Well, I'm gonna spill the beans. So a sacred story is a story that has life inside of it, which we talked about, but it's not just any life. It's like, what are we talking about sacred? We're saying that, oh, I honor the life in you, but not just any life. I honor the life in you that serves life itself. So when I'm looking at a sacred story, when I feel a sacred story come into my being, I'm like, I feel kind of alive. I feel vibrant. I feel good. I feel wiser. Maybe I got access to grief and I was able to release some emotions. And by the way, I feel smarter and sexier. And I think I'll quit caffeine and quit sugar. And I'm going to exercise extra much tomorrow. It's like, I'm just alive with life. Like you feel these sacred stories and you're like, Zaza, boom. Yeah. It's good. But then, so now let's look on the other side, and it's like, what's not a sacred story, and let's look at that. Maybe there's zombie stories that are walking among us. And so a zombie story, after you've been in touch with the life eater stories, like they just suck the life out of you and you feel a little like humans shouldn't be on this planet. We kind of suck. Everybody sucks, actually. And you start judging everybody and look at that loser and that loser. And you just kind of want to die a little. And now, well, maybe they should die a little, it's like, and you start going down this negative spiral and let's might as well watch some extra Netflix before we go to bed anyway, rather than do a nice little sleep ritual. So it's think about what are the TV shows, what are the movies, what are the stories that you're bringing to the table, who are the companions that you're sharing with life. And I'm not saying don't look at hard stories. I'm not saying don't look at confrontational stories. I'm saying pay extra special attention to what's happening in your energy field when you start taking on all these different stories among us. So I made a little promise to talk a little bit about something I don't usually talk about, which is carrying an old story and the process of doing that. I really think about so when we look at these stories and Sean Kane says that myths are the earth speaking out loud. And I know stories as being wild beings, these wild creatures. And for years and years, there were oral traditions. And stories were carried through memory, and they're carried from one person to another to another. And what happens when a story is carried, it's like the language changes, the circumstance can change, the examples can change, because it's now speaking through the storyteller in this time. We can see many of our old fairy tales have been modernized, Cinderella to Pretty Woman. It's like we can see how these old stories or have a way of speaking through our modern day life. And to understand a story, to really understand a story, you really have to understand the time that it was born in. They'll say, to know if a story is trustworthy, you have to know the land that it came from. And to understand that story even speaks the language of the land that it came from. Sometimes I'll hear different Indigenous stories because I love collecting them. It's very disruptive to my little body because they have very different patterning and different ways of talking story. And I know that I'm actually in a separate language than my own. I don't understand the land that it comes from. I don't understand the culture that they come from. So there are many things I just can't understand. I can catch threads, I can get the gist, but I have to know that in my heart of hearts, like, look, if I go to France and I speak a third of the language, I'm only going to understand a third of what's being said, and so same thing with story. You go to France, you learn French. You go to Spain, you learn Spanish. You want to go to the land of story, you got to learn symbol. You got to learn the language of metaphor. You got to learn the language of archetype, because that's how story speaks to us. It's not linear. It's not literal. It doesn't give a flying crap about facts and information. That's not the territory of how it compensates us. It speaks in a much more expansive way. And it comes out of this energy field that truly just loves to play with our consciousness. And so one of the things that I love about it is that it will take you to the sanctuary of your own being. And we can be in a room together and we can all share a story. We have this shared common experience. But we also got to do it in the absolute privacy of our inner temple. And we got to have our own noticing of, ooh, man, I saw that character and he sure was a jerk. And ooh, ouch, I just saw a reflection of how I can be a jerk too in those situations. And that kind of hurts. But like, oh, look, I can do it in a shared experience, because what do we know about bravery and courage and grieving? Like, we need to do those in community. What a beautiful thing. It's like it needs to be done in community and connection. But but we also do it together, and it's also intensely private. And so stories in their greatest expression, it's a cliche, but there's truth in cliches, right? And so in the movie where you go to the Indigenous elder and they're like, give me the advice, and the Indigenous elder gives them a story. And what are they doing? They're saying, look, don't look for your answers outside yourself. That's what they're being, the ultimate guide. What is the role of a storyteller? But it's the ultimate guide. It says, I will give you the tools to explore and connect with your own divinity and your own truth. So it's the anti-influencer is what the story is. It says, no, you're the one that knows the answer. You've got it inside. And the other thing that stories do, which I just think are profound, extraordinary things, is that they bring us into, I said they bring us into the greatest exaltation of ourselves, meaning that to tell a story, you get to connect to earth. You got to be grounded. If you're not grounded, people won't hear your voice. So you got to be grounded, connected to earth, and then, connected to the spirit, to the muse, to the inspiration. And so what's happening here is your body becomes this tool, right? That's why we said at the very beginning, let's check in with your tool. So your body is this connection for the alchemy of the earth and spirit coming together and meeting, being electrified, giving life through the pulse of your heart and energy, given energy and life, to be then spoken through you, and then giving away to walk among us. So what stories will you be telling and giving a place on earth here? That's what's happening. We're giving the unseen world a place to live among us. So what are the dreams that you're carrying? What's the vision for the future? How has your imagination been hijacked by other people's nightmare, and then using the precious life force of yours to give it more and more energy to live among us? I feel like part of my work has been to reclaim our imagination and reclaim our capacity to vision, and calling back on the most ancient language knowledge that we have, that we're the ones that are creating the future, but actually we're right here in the present. The only way that we can get there is through each step that we each take. I'm not walking towards someone else's nightmare. I'm walking towards my dream. As a storyteller, we know that we can do that. So it's not Pollyanna thinking. That's just practical, like old knowledge, wisdom teachings. So when we come towards this idea of carrying an old story, I'll say that again because I saw that my video just went out. When we come towards carrying an old story, there's great responsibility to it. It's a great honor. I love that Aboriginal saying, the stories from the past must be spoken to the present so that the future can exist. We can't forget where we came from. That's what we're doing as storytellers. We're the great librarians of the earth. Don't forget where you come from. It's great that you want to change everything and break every system. Know how we got here, so that you don't repeat the same mistakes. That's what we're doing over here. So, but gosh, just because the story was born, should know the land that it came from, know its creator. What was that creator in service to? What could they say or not say? And now you'll begin to understand that story. And then when you say, well, what am I in service to? And what does that story have to say to me? And what does it want to say through me? Why has it come knocking on my door? And then how do I be respectful to an elder? Like if you're working with an old story, and it's old, it's like 200, 300 years old. and you're looking at it and you're like, that's pretty patriarchal perspective. That's pretty lame, and you smack it around. You don't think that it's going to come smack you around too? It's like think about like if it's an elder, you're like, I don't like that outfit, and you just try to tear it off, it's going to punch you in the face. It's like, again, these are strong beings. Stories are strong. So when you come to be carrying an old story, I can't say it's like really come and respect. How would you treat an elder in a culture that respects elders? Well, you might be quiet before you told it everything that you know. Maybe you'd do some deep listening. Maybe you'd study a bunch of different versions of the stories, because what do we know about stories? It's kind of magical that a lot of them popped up on different continents. Same story is just told through slightly different structures of what those people knew and understood, right? So you start listening to them and you start finding the bones. Okay, what is the core skeleton? What is the structure of the story? That holds the wisdom teaching. That holds the thing I need to pay attention to. One of the structures that you'll find in Sleeping Beauty is that there's a warning in so many of the old stories. Do not make an outsider. It will cast a curse on the collective. That teaching is in so many old stories. So you don't like that Sleeping Beauty needs some dude to wake her up? That's fine. Maybe that part is changing. Maybe you want to look closer at how does the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine want to converge and be in healthy relationship. That's great, but don't ignore the wisdom teaching and the teacher in the story, because it's here for you and it has a gift to offer. So when you're coming towards these old stories, right, it's like you got to pay attention to what's the core bones of it. And maybe you want to say, hey, you know what? You could use a facelift. We got Botox over here. We got, I'm in Southern California. This is big here. But maybe, if you're somewhere else, you don't think you want to, change its shape and form so much, you might say, well, we've got a fancy new outfit for you. It's modern day fabric. It's cotton. Maybe you want that, And so you start going to it and you're saying, well, how can you speak through the language of this time and the circumstances of this time? And you start meeting the story in a respectful way, and you start seeing how does it want to shape and form so it can be heard by the people of our times, and that old wisdom still gets to live among us. So it's like I do have this thing where I feel like, man, listen to the language. What do we do as writers? We write it down. Isn't that great? It just talks about the process. We take it from the imaginal space, we write it down, and then we enslave it in the book, and we make it stay the same forever. That's so messed up when I think about it. Nobody else has to stay the same. Their whole, like, trees grow, humans grow, mountains get to change shape and form. It's stories. Some of our stories have gotten stuck in one shape. And I think of them as slaves, those poor things, having to live the same existence over and over and over again and not be allowed to evolve like the rest of us. Because that's what we yearn for, to have this growing, this relationship of death and rebirth. So just because a story is old, and just because a storyteller is carrying an old story, neither one of them are trustworthy. So it's like, keep listening to the stories and what's really inside of it. What are you in service to? What do you want to give life to? And is that in that story? Okay, we are at our hour. And so what I'm going to do right now, if you are complete, I say, Yahoo! I hope you got something that you can put to good use. I hope that you would consider, sharing the School for Sacred Storytelling with others. We really appreciate everyone's support and help in letting other people know who would be served by this way of being with story in this time. And I'm going to tell you a few lines about the sacred storytelling. And then, since Chris asked the big question around story and 6 mass extinction, I'm going to tell a little tiny story that I've been carrying for a little bit around another way of looking at Earth. And so Marie says, how can you contact me for an interview? You go to info@lealam.com, and that's where you can get all the answers. You can also go to lealam.com and find out about upcoming classes. And one of the classes that we have coming up right now is called Cantadora. And Cantadora is all about learning how to carry old stories. It's the only class that I teach that teaches this. And it's a really beautiful practice that's almost being lost because there are so many old stories that offer us so much. So you know, it's a beautiful practice. And so I am going to bring you up this link while we're doing this so that you can see it. And that starts, I think, next week, I think. Yeah, I think it starts in next week. So we meet on Tuesday mornings and we at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and you'll get a chance to learn old stories from around the globe. I always recommend that people come to the stories of their original lineage because you get to learn your old cultural stories, but you also get to hear everybody's old cultural stories. And then we'll be getting deeper and deeper into the practice of what is it to carry an old story in a good way. For some reason, the link is not going to work for me today. But if you go to leolam.com and you go to upcoming classes, it will be there for you. I'm also doing a workshop on, oh, thank you, Samantha. It starts on April 25th. Is it available for replay if we miss it live? Yes, all classes are recorded and we meet in a place called Mighty Networks, which is sort of it's like the function of Facebook, only it's a private world. And so it's a place where people can come and be in relationship to each other. When you sign up for a class, you get something else, which is pretty kind of awesome, I think, which is you also get a free month of membership from our School for Sacred Storytelling. So that means that you get 4 extra bonus classes of where we meet on Wednesday mornings and we just do free writes. I'll give you a creative prompt and we'll all write and you get a little bit of feedback. You get some support in your creativity. And then we also get to join our reading club, and we meet once a month and we read 1 chapter. It's not a high stress reading club out of the 13 original grandmothers. And it's according to the actual month that we're in and wisdom teachings from them. It's a really delightful book and way to be together and learning from the old stories. And you get to come to live talks, which I do with the podcast that I do. And so you get to be part of the live audience and in a live conversation. So those are all part of the membership, which you get for free as part of your tuition when you come join classes. And if you don't want a class, but you want all that, you can come just become a member and get all that. Thank you, Samantha. Yes, I do one-on-ones. I do soul stories. You know, I always forget to tell people about that, which is just crazy. I do this really kind of magical thing. I'm going to call it that. And I call it that in true humbleness, because we do it in communion with the unseen world, and we do it in the space of prayer. And a story is divined just for you. And then we explore what's happening and living in your consciousness and what guidance wants to come through. So there you go. Thank you, Janet. Good to be with you. Okay, here's a story. You ready? Any other questions before I move on in terms of the School for Sacred Storytelling and all that? So, I forgot. I am doing a live workshop in LA at the end of the month called Myth, Magic, and Medicine. So if you live in Southern California, you can find more information on our website. I'm just going to tell you a little tiny bit of this story. Here we go. Once upon a time, a long, very long time ago, there was a time when Venuses made it with Venuses, and Mars made it with Mars, and Jupiter's made it with Jupiters, and that's kind of how everything was moving along in the universe. And nobody knows exactly how this part of the story began, because it was lost over time. But somehow some planet lost her constellation in the sky, and she was out there in the universe all by herself. And they say that the old and broken stories that were flying about devoured her. And you know, you've met some of these old and broken stories, the stories of betrayal, the story of scarcity, the story of there's not enough, the story of separation, the story of greed, they came in and destroyed her. Because there was no one there to witness or protect her from these beings. And when her constellation all of a sudden became aware that one of them had somehow gotten separated and had been devoured, the grief that came through the universe was so extraordinary and so complete and so horrible that it sliced a hole straight through the universe. And they say that is when love came in. And when love came in, all of a sudden, beings started looking at other beings just a little bit differently. Because, love is wily. She doesn't care about boundaries. She goes wherever she wants. She's fierce. She just, was wandering all around. And all of a sudden, mountain planet started looking at an ocean planet. And even though no one had done it before, they started coming closer. They started getting together. They started flirting. They started noticing all these really cool things about the other. And then kaboom. They say that's how Earth got born. And no one had seen a mixed blood planet before. Part earth, part water. And they were so afraid of what they had created because nobody had seen anything like it before. And remember, they had known what had happened to one who had lost her constellation, and no one knows exactly how they did it. The last thing that they wanted was to be banished from their world for doing something so different. And so they went real close and they're like, well, we'll just kill her. And they came close to Earth and they looked at her. She was so cute. She was so beautiful. She was adorable. 5 little oceans, 6 mountaintops, rivers that just flowed, flowers that bloomed. She was something. There was no way they could destroy that. And there was no way they could live with it. And so her father whispered into her ear. He said, you are made of love. And don't you ever forget that. And they took her, they threw her in the farthest universe, 5 universes away. Well, Earth was lonely. Like really lonely, like really lonely. And she sang about it. She sang about her loneliness. And she was like, look, if anybody else wants a friend, I'm here. I can play. I'll learn tricks. I'll do anything. Like, somebody, please, please, please. And she sang, and finally Jupiter came around. Jupiter was like, child, what is going on with this nonstop nonsense? Like, what is wrong? She's like, I'm so lonely. I'm here all by myself. He looked at her. He'd never seen anything like her before. And she was kind of cute. And, he's like, well, you're going to need a guide. You're going to need an uncle. I'll uncle you. And I'm going to teach you how to be all of yourself. Even though I don't even know half the things about you, I'm going to teach you how to be all of yourself and grow big and up and into who you're supposed to become. She's like, okay. And then Saturn came around and Saturn's like, oh, you're going to need some discipline and structure if you're going to learn how to be all of yourself. So I'm going to teach you that. And Mars was like, you're awfully beautiful. You're going to have to learn how to protect yourself. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. And then Venus came around. She was like, oh my God, you guys are so serious. I'm going to teach you how to play and have fun and be joyful and be sexy and beautiful. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. And so all of a sudden, Earth had something that nobody in the universe had. She had an entire constellation of all these different guides to help and support her. And she became very powerful. There was a moment when they all looked around and they're like, wow, she's got all of our powers into one and no other planet has had this. Should we destroy her? And they came close and they're like, no, we can't destroy her. She's too amazing, but we're going to have to teach her how to be responsible. Now, meanwhile, no, I'm just going to cut to the chase, because this is a long story, but I'm going to just give you the first chapter. Hey, guess what? That song of belonging and desire, a lot of people heard it. A bunch of star beings heard it, and they were sick and tired of not being in bodies. And so they made a run for it. And Earth was like, oh my God, you're going to come live with me. Yay. And she built up a body out of her own beingness. And so that they could live and dance among her and life was good. But hey, they weren't the only ones that heard from her. Because those broken stories that were rummaging around the outer world, they were also rummaging around. And the story of scarcity came up to her and he said, hey, you're going to run out of apples. She looked around. She's like, what do you mean I'm not going to run out of apples? He's like, no, you're going to run out of apples. She's like, look, I apples, other people have them. You know, it's like they fall into the earth, more seeds, more trees. Then the tree rests a little bit, and when the tree's resting, the pears start to grow and the oranges start to grow, and it's okay, dude. And then they come back. You know, we've got this whole regenerative cycle. You know, and like they're not going to run out of apples. You're going to run out of water. I can just see it. You're just like giving it away like nothing, letting it free flow. You're going to run out. She's like, don't you know anything about like gravitational forces and how like the cycle of life, and you know, the water goes out and evaporates, it goes up to the mountains, turns into snow, comes back down. It's like I'm not gonna move it around, you know, deserts coming, trees and trees coming out. It's like, no, I'm not gonna run out of water. What are you talking about? Because you know, your problem is story of scarcity. No one had ever stood up to the story of scarcity before, because all of them would always run away from him because he was kind of mean. She goes, I think that you're not telling me the whole story. It's like, what do you mean? He's like, I think that you're actually trying to tell me that I should value what I have. He goes, whoa, no one's ever seen me for my wholeness before. And they got into this big, long and talking thing and all this stuff. And all of a sudden he says, hey, would you let me and all my broken story friends come and come to you? Because I think I can see what you are. I think you're a healer. I think you're a healer, Earth. I think you have very special powers. And that if I came and spent a lot of time with you, with that healing ability, I could come into my wholeness. And I could live as a whole being walking among you. And I wouldn't be this being that would be devouring everything around me because I'm so desperately hungry for what I don't have. So that's interesting. No one's ever called me a healer before. So she goes up to Earth, you know, she goes up to her constellations. This is another big, long part of the story. They decide, look, you're going to have initiation. You get to choose it. She says, yes, I'm going to take on this initiation. Bring on the old stories. It's a whole thing. It's like 40 more minutes, but it comes down to this, the very end of the story. You know, they're sitting there and they're sitting there with her, and someone's granting wishes, you know, and they're like, Earth, if you could wish for anything, what would it be? She's like, you know what I've always dreamed of? And they were like, what? I've always dreamed of being a really great mother. And they're like, oh, well, we'll hold that dream for you as you're in the state of this maidenhood, crossing across this initiation, learning about yourself as a healer. But one day you want to become the great mother. We'll hold that for you. So that's a little story that's been coming alive in these times. And thank you for being with me and catching that fun one. And may the stories that you tell feed you and nourish you and bring aspects to see all the different parts of yourself and all the aspects of your wholeness. And what book does this fabulous story come from? She asks. And it comes from the Book of Life. I opened to a story and I asked for a different climate story. I was like, come on, can't we get out of this nonsense? Can't we see another bigger story about what's really happening? And all of a sudden the Earth said, yeah, I'm a freaking healer. Can't you see that? I'm not actually the great mother yet. I'm going through initiation. I need your help. You know, and so she told that story, and so I'm carrying it for you. So it's not written down in a book, but if you go to my website and you scroll down the homepage, you'll see the story of Earth's becoming, or the Great Mother, and it's a nice longer story, about 40 minutes, and you'll catch that there. But all right, bless thee well. Hopefully I'll be seeing you soon and sharing more of your stories, and have a great day. I invite you to take yourselves off of mute and allow yourself to say goodbye, farewell, have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was fun and interesting.
Good.
Thank you, Leah. Come to the
Thank
UK.
you.
I would love to come to the UK. I respond
Oh,
very
and the-
well to invitations.
And down the east coast of Australia would love you to come home.
Yes, I would love that too. Love
Thank
that.
you for everything. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi,
Have a great day.
thank you.
Good to
My
see you
first
again,
name is
Sean.
Leah.
Bye.
Thank you. My first name is Leah too, but I
Oh,
go by
nice.
my, and I was in Vermont a lot too.
Oh, amazing. Ah,
Yeah, School for International Training, and
yeah.
Rudyard Kipling wrote, and Flaherty filmmakers and all of that.
Oh, that's great. It's a good kindred group. Amazing.
Mhm.
Oh,
Bye, thank
Bye.
you.
I'm so rich.
Bye, Chris.
Well, thank you, Leah.
You're
Good
welcome.
food for thought as always.
You're good. Good. Thank
Um,
you. Thanks for all the good work that you're doing.
Yeah, I definitely need some help doing it though. It's pretty daunting even without cancer.
Yeah.
But cancer has been sort of a get out of jail for free card in the sense that I don't need to worry about retirement. I'm not worried about people threatening me or whatever. You know, when some right winger sends me a death threat, I'm like, get in line.
Mm.
It's you or cancer. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to keep doing.
Wow. Wow.
So, but I could definitely use some help crafting how I tell the story to
Mhm.
get people to help me become part of the team, because I won't be here that much longer.
Yeah.
I won't be here to see the results, but I hope to get it started.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that's kind of one of the most generous things that we can do as storytellers, right? It's like we leave our stories behind. Everything else goes, everything else will go, but we can leave our stories behind. I know that you've been weaving a powerful, potent story of deeply caring for this planet in so many different ways, and community and yeah, if you want help working on your story, ping me over there. I put my finger on the button, and it's like as soon as I release, it's going to end this whole conversation.
Oh,
But
can I just
um,
add one more thing?
mhm.
Just a really neat fact that kind of might play into your story. So I was teaching about mummy chugs yesterday. They're kind of very ubiquitous fish in the salt marsh,
Mm.
and a lot of the food chain depends on them. And they actually went up in space, as did fireflies.
Mm.
And somehow they were part of some of the early space flights. And I thought somehow that's so fascinating, but also somehow it might play into your story of the Earth and its relationship to other spatial entities. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Good luck,
Yeah.
Chris.
Bye,
Bye.
Chris. And yeah, send me an email, and I do story coaching and stuff, and we can figure something out. Or even the membership program might be a great place for you to come and work on your stories in the morning and get prompts and things like that to start, working on it. So we can talk. Okay. Bye.
Bye.